Okay, gewaltig. So let's see what we learned about yesterday. Yesterday, half of the day was a Gittin Gemara that discussed. We went through a lot of things. We went through the halacha of al yatel adam emi yiser b'soich beisai, and then we had the story of Mar Ukva, who was complaining that people were bothering him, and he wanted to know if he could be malshin on them. And Rabbi Loza told him he absolutely shouldn't. He should leave it up to Hashem to take care of. Then we learned about the fact that you're not allowed to listen to music anymore nowadays, and we discussed what the halachas were. Then we discussed certain drushas on the psukim, listing off the cities in Eretz Yisrael. But the gist of it is that if someone bothers you and you don't respond, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes care of you. And then we learned about people should give a lot of tzedakah. If someone has mezainos of a tzimtzum, you should give tzedakah. If someone has mezainos of barafos, you should give tzedakah. And even if someone is struggling, if he gives tzedakah, the Torah finishes off by saying, Lo encha oid, as Rabbi Yosy said, Shuv ein marin lo siman aniyas. That's the best way to get out of a tight spot. Then we learned about the northern border of Eretz Yisrael, which is Aku in, if you're looking at the whole width of Eretz Yisrael, but there was a little strip of Eretz Yisrael that continued north up until Kiziv. So that was the Gemara from yesterday, and now we are up to about 15 lines from the bottom on Zayin Amud Beis. We have a new sugya, Tana Chada. Thank you so much, Mati. So Tana Chada, we have one brisa that teaches us, maybe get besvina. And maybe get besvina. And Rashi tells us, at least now at this point in the Gemara, we assume that we're on a waterway that's within Eretz Yisrael's boundaries. So you have a boat, and on this boat there was a sofer, and he wrote a get, l'shma. He wrote a get for a woman on the boat, and that get was given to a shliach l'halacha to deliver to a woman living in Eretz Yisrael. So the halacha is kamevi be'Eretz Yisrael. Being in a waterway that's within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael is like being in Eretz Yisrael. No, it matters where the boat was when the get was written. Right? As long as while it was written, it was in Israeli waterways. Oh, so you're saying if the people come from elsewhere, so they're not B'kiyim Lishma. Oh, that's an interesting point. You hear what David's bringing up? If a boat was coming from Portugal, and just because it's in Israeli waterways, it doesn't make them automatically B'kiyim B'Lishma. Very interesting ha'ara. I don't know the answer to that. Okay. So let's see the Gemara weiter. We had another brisa that it's kamevi b'chutz la'aretz, that the waterways of Eretz Yisrael are not considered like Eretz Yisrael. So that's a stira. Rabbi Yirmiyah kasha. Ha Rabbi Yehuda, ha Rabban. There's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. The Tanan we learned. Afar chutz la'aretz haba b'svina la'aretz. What if you had earth from chutz la'aretz? So you had a big planter that was placed on a ship, and the planter was full of earth from North America, and this ship was in the waterways of Eretz Yisrael, and you planted in that planter on that ship. So if something grows there, chayev b'maisu b'shviyas, it's treated like peiros haaretz. I'm Rabbi Yehuda. Dr. Yehuda. Amosai, when do you say that it's considered like peiros haaretz? That's bisman shasvina gosheshes. That's if the water is not deep. The draft of the ship is more than the water's depth, so the bottom of the ship is rubbing along the earth at the bottom of the lake. But if the boat is floating and it's surrounded with water and it's not touching the bottom of the lake, potter, then it will be potter. So we have a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama if a boat in water is considered planted in the ground or not. So therefore, the brisa that says I maybe get between the maybe Eretz Yisrael is going to go to Rabbanan. Even though the boat is floating, it's still considered the land of Eretz Yisrael. And the brisa that says maybe b'chutz la'aretz holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds a boat that's on the water, is not considered part of Eretz Yisrael. So here's where everyone's supposed to ask me, what is the classification of Eretz Yisrael? Like I was saying, have anything to do with it's considered growing where these plants are considered growing in Israel, right? So Tosfos touches on it, but the main point is that we're talking about here la'achar shalamdu, and the only reason why we're enforcing the takana is because shaloi tachloik b'chutz la'aretz. I take back. It's not relevant la'achar shalamdu. It's relevant where the cities are. We learned earlier we had 3 machlokes in the Mishnah. The Tanakama held that the cities that are out of Eretz Yisrael but nearby, those are also not required to say b'fani nechtam. Then we had the shita of, I forgot who the second shita in the Mishnah was, who held that if it was muvlois, you don't have to say b'fani nechtam. And there was a shita who held, I think Rabbi Levi held, if it was smuchos, you don't have to say b'fani nechtam. So the Gemara asks, why does Rabbi Lazar say that both smuchos and muvlois don't have to say b'fani nechtam? The Gemara answered, we don't want to make differences. So sometimes, even if there's technically no svara of lishma, and technically there's no svara there's no concern of lishma, and there's no concern of kiyum, but in order not to make differences between the different cities in chutz la'aretz, it's a blanket isser. All of those cities need to say b'fani nechtam. So the question is, that concept, would it be considered Eretz Yisrael or not? So l'gabi that, we could compare it to what's considered Eretz Yisrael l'gabi something that's considered being yoined, growing from the land. So in fact, it's not directly the Svar, and that goes back to what Duvi said as well. Shouldn't it matter these people on the boat where they're from? The vice it must be speaking in cases where the only reason why we're going to require b'fani nechtam and shalatachlek b'minin sayom, that not to make differences between which cities do have to say b'fani nechtam and which ones don't. So l'gabe that, how are we going to classify what Eretz Yisrael is? We'll classify it l'gabe if the growth is considered the growth of Eretz Yisrael. Do you mean cheres or eitz? That's a very important point. So what was the ship made out of? It's actually a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos what the ship was made out of. So let's have a look at what Rashi says. Rashi says the ship is made out of cheres. So Rashi on the first wide line has haba b'svina la'aretz v'zoroi b'svina, and you planted in this planter that you had on the ship, but tzomach and it grew. Zok Rashi v'asvina shel cheresi. We're talking about a svina of cheres. Ve'ein tzrich l'nokeh. Because we've had a hole in it. Could be. So v'asvina shel cheresi ve'ein tzrich l'nokeh im hoysem munachas b'karka v'darini b'nachas. So Rashi says a cheres svina is porous, and therefore, even though it doesn't have, porous means it's not watertight. Things could seep through it, and therefore, even though there's no holes in it, Tosfos brings rice and Gemara that it's punkfakeret. The svina had to be a wood. Wood is considered porous, but if it was of cheres, actually it wouldn't work. So Tosfos says exactly the opposite of Rashi. So let's see the Gemara. Weiter.
The cheres is earthenware. What is cheres exactly?
Earthenware, like clay.
How do you have a ship of earthenware? It's like mud. Never heard of such a thing.
Why wouldn't it dissolve?
Yeah, I mean,
frankly, I wouldn't be comfortable even in a wooden ship. I would like more like a steel hull that's maybe 12 inches thick. That would make me feel more comfortable. And even that didn't survive the iceberg.
Well, most most ships, I think, in antiquity were made of wood.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. But I'm sure the wood got soggy over time. Because that's what Tosha says. The wood gets soggy over time.
It's
And
probably
in fact,
treated, it's varnished or something, right?
and wooden ships, or even I'm thinking more wooden boats. Every couple of years, they have to take it out, bring it to dry dock, and the wood does start to absorb and gets messed up. They have to retreat it on a regular basis, bring it back into dry dock. Okay, so let's see the Gemara back here. So the first teretz that the Gemara proposed, is that the machlokes, these two brises, are totally the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama. The Tanakama holds a floating boat is considered connected to the ground, while Rabbi Yehuda holds a floating boat is not considered connected to the ground. Zok the Gemara, but we have another option. Abai Amar, maybe say Hav Rabbi Yehuda. Let's say both brises according to Rabbi Yehuda. But like Asha, when the brisa says that it's not considered Eretz Yisrael, kan bizman she'eina sfina gosheshes, that the boat is floating and it's not touching the ground. And the brisa that says it's maybe Eretz Yisrael is bizman she'sfina gosheshes, when the ship is actually touching the bottom, touching the ground. Omer Zok Rab Zera, Otet Tznochuv Hamunach Al Gabi Yisedres. You had a flower pot, and the flower pot had holes in it, and it's not sitting on the ground, it's sitting suspended on legs. So imagine you have a flower pot sitting on legs, it's on the ground. What would be the halach? Zok Rab Zera banu l'machlokes Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabban. I think it should be told l'machlokes Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabban. Rabbi Yehuda holds, unless it's touching the ground, it's not connected to the ground. While the Rabban holds, even if it's suspended, it will be connected to the ground. That's the proposal that Reb Zera made. Correct. That's what we're talking about. Interesting enough, this is the first instance of Wi-Fi that we ever see. Right? It's not directly on the ground, but it's communicating with the ground through Wi-Fi. Rabbanon Amar Rava. I'm sorry, I didn't read that. Amar Rava, no. These machlokes are not totally zebazeh. Dilmalohi. At kan loy kam Rabbi Yehuda. Where did Rabbi Yehuda say that it's not considered connected to the ground? Ella besvina. A ship not only is it not connected to the ground, it's moving. Hasuya levroyach. It's moving. Now, interesting enough, there's actually a shayla how to understand this Gemara. Rashi says, because it's actually moving. What if you had a ship that wasn't moving now? What if you had a ship that was anchored? What would be the halacha there? So according to Rashi, it's mashma that the only reason why Rabbi Yehuda says it's not connected is because it's actually moving. What if it was stationary? Maybe then, according to Rashi, Rabbi Yehuda would agree that it would be connected. But an otetz, which is stationary, loy. So the question is, a boat that's currently not moving, would that be comparable to a svina or an otetz? But akalponim, you can hear the difference. Why Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's just suspended in the water, isn't connected to the ground, because it's also moving, it's also mobile. But an otetz, even though it's suspended in the air, it's not mobile. So that's one side. Inami, the opposite way. Well, let me just finish this line. Where did the Rabbanan say over there that the svina is considered connected to the ground? By a ship where there is no airspace between the bottom of the hull and the ground. Either there's water, the maya ki arasmichdami. Water is like loose earth, so it's not considered a hefsek. Aval otzitz, which is suspended in the air, the mafzik avira loy. So therefore, this shaila of an otzitz suspended in the air has no connection whatsoever to the machlokes of Yehuda and the Chachamim, because there are svars either way to show that there's no raya from one to the next. What were you asking? That's how Reb Chaim teaches. But Rashi teaches, it's moving the whole time. Not that it moves once in a while. The Balt, it's always moving. So this is actually a discussion in the Rishonim. It's a discussion in the Rishonim. There's a shaila in the Rishonim exactly what pshat this is, and it was actually negei halacha lemaisa. It was negei lemaisa because there's a problem in understanding the Rambam. The Rambam, in one place, seems to be mashma that the svina is considered stationary, and in one place it's mashma that's considered mobile. So the for the Rambam is when you're moving it, it's considered mobile. When you're not moving it, it's not considered mobile. So they're and it's totally in high over pshat of this Gemara. So that's Gemara about there. I'm sorry. That's what the Gemara is suggesting. Water is considered ka'aris muchta. That's right. Yeah. So Zok Gemara, Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar, b'naharos be'eretz Yisrael, t'chula al maloi pli. Everybody agrees that if you're in the waterways of Eretz Yisrael, it's not a shayla. So now we're changing pshat. Up until this point, we assumed that the waterways that the ship was in that we're discussing was in Israeli waters. Now we're saying if it was in Israeli water, kula al maloi pligi, everybody agrees that avad is considered Eretz Yisrael. and of course you don't have to say b'fani nechtav or b'fani nechtam. The shaila is if the ship was in the Mediterranean. Rashi's b'yam hagadol kitchum ma'ravai shalet Yisrael. Upligi tanoy, and there's a machlokas as follows: Ikalamanda Omar Svas Hayam Huagvul. There are those who say the beach. That's the grenade. That's the border. And the moment you get into the water, you're no longer in Eretz Yisrael. Yam Gufei Lav Eretz Yisraelu. Ikalamanda Omar Yam Gufei Eretz Yisrael. There are those who say that there's territorial waters that also are part of Eretz Yisrael, from where you would not have to say b'fani nechtam, b'fani nechtam. Now we'll get into the details of the geography. But it's interesting. The word Yam HaGadol, we always touch that it means the Mediterranean. But if you think about it, the Mediterranean is hardly a Yam HaGadol. The Pacific and Atlantic Ocean, those are Yam HaGadol, so the Indian Ocean. So there are those who actually learn that Yam HaGadol is referring to the Indian Ocean. Is referring to Atlantic and Pacific. However, those who learn that Yam HaGadol refers to the Mediterranean, why is it called Gadol? It's called Gadol because it's near Eretz Yisrael. That makes it Gadol. Rashi says that. Okay. Titania, Ezeu Eretz, Vezeu Chusla. When you want to assess exactly what's part of Eretz Yisrael and what's not part of Eretz Yisrael, and Rashi tells us that we're now focusing on the northwestern corner of Eretz Yisrael. So what is the northwestern corner of Eretz Yisrael? The Zok to Gemara, the Brisa says you have to find something called Turei Amnon. Turei Amnon is a mountain that's in the northwest, it's on the coast. It's the northwest corner of Eretz Yisrael. And you go to the peak of the mountain, and you go down the mountain as the mountain spreads. As you move towards the south, we're talking about the northwestern border. So as you move towards the south, that's Eretz Yisrael. But if you go to the north, that's called Chutz La'aretz. So what Rashi says is the actual border is the peak of the mountain. And of course, the mountain spreads to the north and spreads to the south. So the north face of the mountain is not part of Eretz Yisrael. The south face of the mountain is part of Eretz Yisrael. So once again, Eretz Yisrael. But Mitur Amnin L'chutz, north of that is Chutz La'aretz. V'anisin Shebayam. What about the islands, the little islands that are in the water that will be included in the border? Roy Nation, how do you figure out where they are? You draw a straight line from the northwestern border, which is the peak of Turei Amnon, and you draw a straight line to the southwestern point, which is called Nachal Mitzrayim. Roy Nation ki l'chut matuach alein mi Turei Amnon but Nachal Mitzrayim. You draw a straight line from the northwestern border to the southwestern point, and then minachut lefnim, anything that's between that line and to the east will be considered Eretz Yisrael. Nachut lechutz, anything to the west is Chutz La'aretz. And let me show you a picture that I got online from from what's it called? One of the daf sites. I forgot the name of. It's Rabbi Schwartzbaum's daf site. So if you look at this large, Turei Amnon is this red point over here, which is a mountain that's right at the top of Eretz Yisrael. And Nachal Mitzrayim is some river that goes from Mitzrayim that gets to the Mediterranean. If you draw a straight line across, there will be some coastal water that would be part of the interior of Eretz Yisrael. Any little islands that are in this area, or even if there's an island that straddles this line, the parts of the island that are within Eretz Yisrael, you don't have to say B'fani Nechtav or B'fani Nechtam, and anything that's out of this line, you do have to say B'fani Nechtav or B'fani Nechtam. So according to this pshat, the line that we're drawing is a north-south line from the northwest tip of Eretz Yisrael to the southwest tip of Eretz Yisrael. It's now in Eretz Yisrael. Correct. And that's why Dubi brought up. The guy could be from South America, and now suddenly he's called an Israeli. I guess that's how it works. I mean, what if a guy from South America moves to Eretz Yisrael? So I guess you have to assume that he knows what he's talking about. Okay. Yeah. So that's why. But even the close large were saying that. But that's why we're only going over here because it's Shalakach like Medina Sayyam. So that's the first shita. So let's read this again. No, don't think that Eretz Yisrael stops a couple of miles to the coast. The Eretz Yisrael extends to the west as far as it can go, all the way to North America. So Rabbi Yehuda Aimer Kol Sheka Neged Eretz Yisrael Haruk Eretz Yisrael. Anything that's opposite Eretz Yisrael on its west side is included in Eretz Yisrael. You know why? Because all of the Yam HaGadol is part of Eretz Yisrael. How do I know this? Because when the Torah describes the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, and I need to make something very clear. There's a lot of different boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. There's the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael that the Torah tells us in Seder Dvarim what they are. Then there's what Yeshua conquered, which is not all of what the Torah says belongs to us. And then there's an even smaller territory that was conquered B'mei Ezra. We're now talking about the psukim in Devarim that include everything. And this
can't be. That can't be because in Bayis Rishon the Torah describes the boundaries going up to Tziron, I think, way farther north than Akko, way farther north.
But that was
well into today's Lebanon.
But that's because they went and took more territory. Or David HaMelech was kovish.
No. That's the boundaries stated in the Torah. You can check it out.
Well, where is Turei Amnon? Maybe Turei Amnon is up into Lebanon.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where that is.
So, yes, that could be. It's not as clear.
But we're talking about the Gemara is talking about Akko and something a little north of that. So Akko, maybe at the time of Bais Sheni, that was Eretz Yisrael. But with regard to Maestros and all of that, and the reason probably why the Jews lived in Akko and South during Bais Sheni. And that's why they consider that, Aim became Lishma and all that sort of thing. That's the criteria of what Eretz Yisrael is Lagabi Gittin. But Eretz Yisrael Lagabi, the real borders, is much farther north.
Okay, could be. But on the west side, what's new here is that on the west side, there is no border. It goes Kol Shekaneged Eretz Yisrael, Harei Eretz Yisrael.
Right. Okay. So
that's really what I'm focusing on. So let's have a look at the psukim where you would know something like this, that the Eretz Yisrael has no limit. Because in Bamidbar, Bamidbar, it says V'nosal Agvol Me'atzboin Nachla Mitzrayim V'hoytei Tzoyis Yom. Then this pasuk, the next pasuk, is completely redundant and repetitive. Ugvul Yom, the western Gvul, V'hoyolachem Hayam HaGadol, that'll be the Mediterranean. Ugvul Zeh Yilachem Gvul Yom. It's highly repetitive. So because of all this extra Rabbi Yehuda darshans that kol shekan neged Eretz Yisrael ariyok Eretz Yisrael shenemer ugvul yam v'hoya lachem hayam agadol ugvul zeh yih lachem gvul yam. Therefore, v'anasan shebetzoden. So what about islands that are extended far out all through the Mediterranean? Roy Noison hiluchut matuach halayan. Now we're going to draw two straight lines, and they're going to be lines that run east-west, one extending from the top of Eretz Yisrael, one extending from the bottom of Eretz Yisrael, moving all the way west. And anything in between those two lines of latitude, will be part of Eretz Yisrael. So kiluchut matuach halayan mikapluria v'adyam ukainis uminachal mitzrayim v'adyam ukainis. So kapluria v'adyam ukainis is the northern line. So Kapluria will be somewhere near Turei Amnon, and Nachal Mitzrayim, V'adyam Ukainis would be the southwest corner of Etrol, and we'll have a line extending west up until the Atlantic. And therefore, let me just finish. Minachut ulufnim, in between these two horizontal lines, is Eretz Yisrael. Minachut uluchutz will be chutz la'aretz. So let's have a look at a picture of that as well, because a picture is always much more clear. So Rabbi Yehuda's shita is like this. We're actually extending from the north tip of Eretz Yisrael, a line going straight to the west, and from the south tip, heading all the way to the west, which includes all of the islands and peninsulas sticking out. So it's going to include the foot of Italy. It's going to include Spain. This here is Spain, right? Gibraltar is down over here, right? So all of these areas, these are some of the Greek islands. All of these are all included in there. Till the Yamukinus, and there are those who learn even past the Yamukinus. It goes forever and ever. So therefore, that would be the border. So let's do this again. Let's see. Keep believing Yamagodol. The question is, in the Yamagodol, what is that considered? Eze Eretz is Chutz Kol Sheshvei V'Yor B'Tur Amnon U'Lufnim is Eretz Yisrael B'Tur Amnon L'Chutz is Chutz La'aretz V'Anasim Shebiyam Roi Nesan Kilu Chutz Matuach Alein B'Tur Amnon Ad Nachal Mitzrayim V'Nachut U'Lufnim Eretz Yisrael V'Nachut L'Chutz Chutz La'aretz V'Yehuda Omer Kol Shekeneged Eretz Yisrael La'Yor Eretz Yisrael Shenemar U'Gvul Yam V'Hoya Lechem Hayam HaGadol U'Gvul Zeh Yeh Lechem Gvul Yam and V'Anasim Shebetzoden, and the islands in between these two lines Roi Nesan Kilu Chutz Matuach Alein Mikapluria V'Ad Yamu Kainis. And therefore, when anything in between these two lines is Eretz Yisrael, when is Chutz La'aretz. Correct the Gemara for the Rabbanon who don't hold that Eretz Yisrael extends westward unlimited. What do they darshan with this extra pasuk that had all that repetition? Rabban Hayu Gvul My Abdullah. He uses it. The Rabban uses it to tell you that it also includes the islands. You don't need a pasuk to say that the islands are included; they're within the boundary. So of course they're going to be included. So maybe that's the machlokes between the two brises. One says if it gets written on a boat, it's considered Eretz Yisrael. One says it's Chutz La'aretz. Why? Because we're talking about in the Mediterranean all the way out. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that's considered part of Eretz Yisrael. According to the Tanakama, it's not. So Frek Taisus Amori de Kasha. So Rabbi Yehuda seems to say here that Eretz Yisrael extends unlimited towards the west. So Shol Rabbeinu Petel or Rabbeinu Tam. If that's the case, the Bizman Hazeh Hayel Yischayev Rabbi Yehuda Ma'aser Onu B'Marov Shel Yisrael. All of Europe should have to bring Trumas and Maestros because we should be technically part of Eretz Yisrael, which I didn't understand so well. Because if you look at these lines, I mean, I don't think these lines are halachically accurate, but it doesn't include much of Europe at all. It's just the lower tip in the Mediterranean. So Lav Davka is Tosus learning Pshat in Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Schwartzberg who made this diagram. Could be all the way to the west. It means it opens up. Maybe it opens up. I'm sorry. That's a beautiful question. Hold that thought. Duvi's asking, is it also the mainland? Maybe just islands, right? Oh, that's a very good question. But Al Kol Panim is asking, Bisman Hazeh, we should be mechuyev even in Europe. Clearly, those two straight lines do not encompass Europe. So clearly, from Tosus Akasha, Tosus is not learning like him. Those two lines, like I don't even know why he made these two. These two lines are not going due west; they're going northwest. So I don't know. I think it's just illustrated, but it's definitely including a lot more than what these two lines include. The Heishiv, so the first answer he said, you're right, but the Lekaim Lan Rabbi Yehuda, we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. So that's why the whole thing's not relevant. Aval Kacha, V'chi Rabbi Yehuda, V'yamaker, B'chol Eretz Yisrael, She'adu Kainis, She'kulam Hayu B'kim L'Shema. How could Rabbi Yehuda say that far out, as far as you can go, you don't have to say B'fani Nechtam, B'fani Nechtam? How do you know that these people even know anything about Gittin? These Gittin could be possible, which is really what Dubi asked, right? They could be from far away. You don't know where these people are. Who said Edom will be between L'Kaiman if you're talking about far west, thousands of miles west of the shore? First of all, the Oile Bavel did not capture all of this land. So this goes back to what David was saying, and that is, even though in the Torah it included that all of that would be part of Eretz Yisrael, maybe the Oile Bavel, when they came back for the second Beis Hamikdash, maybe they didn't capture it, and the Kedusha Rishona, like Kitchen lost at Lavai. And therefore, now they're not part of Eretz Yisrael. And as far as the Takana of the Gemara, it's also not part of Eretz Yisrael, because the Takana of the Gemara is by the second Beis Hamikdash. Inami, could appear Shbekudris, the Chol Sheken Neged Eretz Yisrael, Hainu, like Dovi said, Kol Hayam Sheken Neged Eretz Yisrael, the Loi Ari B'Yabosha She'arukainis, El B'Nasan She'B'Yam Agadol, Dafka. Till it hits land, mainland, but the mainland itself would not be included as part of Eretz Yisrael, only in the water, which would include islands, but not any continents. So that was the other teretz. Tyson says, maybe Rabbi Yehuda knew that all those people far out were Lishma. Why? They knew how far from the west coast of Eretz Yisrael there were Jewish communities. And after that point where there are no more Jewish communities, there wouldn't be Jews there. So it's only relevant as far as where you see Jewish communities. And in all those Jewish communities, yes, Rabbi Yehuda did know, in fact, that they were Bekin, Bilashma, and they were able to bring Edom L'Kaim. But so it's not like it's unlimited as far as the Jewish community is extended. Okay, Gavaltik. So this is a very interesting machlokes and an interesting shaila how far the Gvulim of Eretz Yisrael extended. Zok the Gemara about here. Rabbi Meir Omer Aku Eretz Yisrael. And this is Lagabe Gittin. Boy Minei Rabbi Chia Bar Abba. Hamoicher Abdei L'Surya. The halacha is, if you have an Eved is mechuyev in mitzvahs, many mitzvahs, like an Isha. Now, if you sell an Eved from Eretz Yisrael to someone in Chutz La'aretz, you're depriving that Eved of the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. And you're depriving him of all other mitzvahs Tluis Ba'aretz. So we don't want people to do that. And therefore, they made a knas that if you sell an Eved to someone in Chutz La'aretz, the Eved gets to go free. The loser in this transaction is the Lakeach. And it's definitely going to be a deterrent. No one from Chutz La'aretz will buy an Eved from Eretz Yisrael, because the moment they pay for it, they lost them. So what happens if you sell an Eved to Surya? So boy minei Reb Chia bar Abba, hamoicher abdei l'Surya, and Surya I believe is Syria. Kamoicher b'chutz la'aretz dami, and therefore the Eved goes free. Oiloi. Amalut Nisua. We have a raya from our Mishnah. Reb Meir Omer Aku Eretz Yisrael Gittin in lavadim lo. Even Aku, which is just out of the border of Eretz Yisrael, that's only Eretz Yisrael l'gabe Gittin. But lavadim, if you sold an Eved even to a city as close to Eretz Yisrael as Aku, the knas would still apply. The kol shekein Surya the mecha katuva. Surely, if you sold an Eved to Surya, the takana applies that it goes l'cheres. Taner Rabbanan. Sorry? Syria. Taner Rabbanan. V'shloishet drachim shifsa Surya l'Eretz Yisrael. In 3 ways, Surya has similarities, share halachas with Eretz Yisrael. V'shloishet l'chutz la'aretz. After tamei k'chutz la'aretz. We know Chazal made a gzeira on the offer of Chutz La'aretz that it's matame. The offer, the earth of Syria is matame as well. V'amoicher abdei l'Surya kamoicher b'chutz la'aretz, like we just learned. And the third similarity is maybe get Misuria can maybe b'chutz la'aretz, and you have to say b'fani nechtav. U'b'shloisha l'Eretz Yisrael. But there are certain ways, 3 ways in which Surya is delivered to Eretz Yisrael. A is chayeves b'maiser u'b'shviyis k'Eretz Yisrael. Surya is chayev b'maiser and shviyis in Eretz Yisrael. Like Eretz Yisrael. And the Gemara is going to explain everything why. And then the second thing is Varocheli Kanis La B'Tahayra Nichnis. And the Gemara again is going to explain what this means. V'akoina Sada B'Surya, and if you buy a field in Surya, it is Kikoina Be'eretz Yisrael. It's just like you bought it in Eretz Yisrael. Again, we're going to have to see what's the relevance of buying a field that it's like in Eretz Yisrael. Kikoina B'Fru'ara Yerushalayim, it's like you bought in the municipality of Yerushalayim. So let's see what these things mean and what the pshat is. Chayav b'maisher v'shviyas, Eretz Yisrael. Why is that? Because Savar Kibish Yachid Shemei Kiddush. Rashi tells us that David HaMelech wanted to expand the territory of Eretz Yisrael, and he in fact took over Syria. But that was called Kibush Yachid because when David HaMelech took over Syria, he had an army, he took it over. But not all of Klal Yisrael was involved, like when Yeshua came in with Klal Yisrael, all of Klal Yisrael fought the war to take over Eretz Yisrael. So the Chiddush is that even Kibush Yachid Shmei Kibush, to give it a status of Eretz Yisrael, Legabe, Trumas and Maishris. So David HaMelech's conquest gave it Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, Legabe, Trumas and Maishris. By Rochel Likanis Ba B'Tahayra Nichnes, correct the Gemara. How could you say that? V'ya Amrat Afratame. Didn't you just say a minute ago that it's Afar is Tame? So if it's Afar is Tame, how could you go in and remain Tar? If you go in, you're going to become Tame. You're walking on the earth. And for the Gemara, V'Sheda Tevo Migdal. That's if someone carried you. What if you're in a box and people carried you in a box? So you're not stepping on the ground. You're hovering above the ground. The Tanya we learned, Hanichdas la'eretz ha'amin b'shei table migdal. What if you go into Eretz Ha'amin where they were goyzer tuma on Eretz Ha'amin, but you're not standing on the soil, you're being carried in, you're suspended. The halach is Rabbi Mitame. Rabbi holds it's tamei, and he holds it tamei because he holds that a mobile oil does not protect you from tuma. And Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda is mitaher. Ba'afilu Rabbi loy kamatame. Ella be'eretz ha'amin. Rebbe who holds that this oil zark will not protect you, that's only in Eretz Ha'amin. You know why? Because in Eretz Ha'amin, they weren't only gozer on the earth that it's tamei, the gozer al gusha, but also be'al avira. The air of Eretz Yisrael is tamei. So since you're the air of Chutz La'aretz is tamei, and therefore the mere fact that you're hovering in the air makes you tamei, and therefore the oil zark won't protect you. Avol Surya, the Gzera was less. Al Gusha goes through. They were only gozer on the earth itself, which means it's only tamei b'maga u'b'masa. The difference between them making the avir tamei and the gush tamei is if they made the gush tamei, then they're only gozer that you're not allowed to touch it. If you touch it, you become tamei, or if you carry it, you become tamei. But if you go into its airspace, oil would not be matami. So by all other countries of Chutz La'aretz, they said it's a matama ba'oil. So if you're in the airspace, you'll be tamei. And the Baal Rebbe holds an oil zark doesn't protect you. So even though you're in your own little sealed oil, that sealed oil will not protect you if it's a mobile oil. But under the same scenario, if you go into Syria, there you won't have a problem because there is no tumas oil. In order to become tummy, you have to have your feet planted on the soil. You're hovering, therefore you're not going to be tummy. Al Surya, Al Gusha goes or Al Avira like goes. Beautiful. And if the gush is tamei, so then the pairs are going to be tamei. So first of all, I don't know. Truma you have a problem with, but Maisha I don't have a problem with, and maybe while it's mechubel karka, could be it's not tamei. So I'm not sure how you would do that, but you could maybe you can cut it in such a way where it won't become a tamei. That's a good error. It's a good error. If the gush is tamei, so why won't the pairs become tamei? What does that mean? Buying a property in Syria is like buying it in the municipality of Yerushalayim. Since we want people to own land in Eretz Yisrael, and it's so important to retrieve and reclaim land from the Goyim, you're allowed to write a star, mechira, even on Shabbos. You tell me you're allowed to do a malacha, the rise of ksiva on Shabbos? Impossible. It's you're allowed to tell a goy to write the star on Shabbos if you have an opportunity to buy property in Eretz Yisrael and Huadin in Syria. If you have an opportunity to buy it on Shabbos and you can get a goy to write the star, you should do that. I'm sorry? Could be you do need an aid, but I'm sorry. Yeah, Hachanami. Hachanami, Aimer Loivet Kachavim Vaisa. Even though it's an Issur D'Rabbanan to ask a guy to do an Aveir for you, a Melacha for you, Mishum Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, like Gazer Rabbanan, because of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, Rashi's Lagaresh Oivdei Kachavim V'Leishav Yisrael Ba, they waive the Issur D'Rabbanan to allow you to purchase the property. Taner Rabbanan, Evet Shehevi Gittin, the Kosev boy, an Evet brought his own get. So the Evet is Shliach L'Locha. He was an Evet, and he came to Bezin with a get, and it said in the get, Atzmach Unichasai Knuyin Lach. Clearly, this Adon liked him very much. And this Adon wrote a star to his Evet, and he wrote in the star, I'm giving yourself to yourself, but I'm also giving all of my other assets to you as well. Now the problem is, we're going to soon learn that the same way they made a takana that you have to say b'fani nechtam, and it's believed for a get isha, even though you're the shliach yourself, the same rule applies to an evet. But every other star mominus requires two Aiden to be mekayim. So here he has a single star that says two things in it. One of the things in it that you should be calling yourself, for that he's believed to say b'fani nechtam. But lagabe the other assets, there he would need two Aiden to be mekayim. So what do you do? So the halacha is evet shebegite because by atzma unechosek knuyin lach. The halacha is atzma kana nechosem loikana, because the star has to be proven, and by a star moment is taininin loy mezuya. So therefore he has to prove it with two Adim. If he doesn't have two Adim to be mekayim the star, then he gets to go free, but the other assets he does not get. Iboilu. What if the Adon didn't separate out atzmoich separate and nechosai? Rather, he just wrote in general kol nechosai knuyin lach. All of my assets go to the Evet, including the Evet itself. So that would include freeing the Evet himself. Now, what would the halacha be? Amar Abaye mitoich shekana atzmoi v'ibalt. He's neman to be mekayim the star legabe freeing himself. Kana nechosim will also say that the star is mekuyim and he's koina all of the nechosim. Amalei Rava, Neichadesa, Bishlama Atzmoi Likni. I understand he should be koina himself. Midi dehava a get isha, because a get isha also there's a special namonus of the shliach leilocha to say b'fani nechtav or b'fani nechtam to be mekayim the star. El nechosim loy likni. Why would we also extend that namonus l'gavid nechosim? Midi dehava akim shtar is da'alma. Any other case of kiyum shtaris requires two Adim. So now we're just going to trust one Aid. Hadar Amar Abaye, then Abaye changed his mind, not because of Rava's kasha, because what Abaye changed his mind to doesn't either agree with Rava. And what did he say? So Abaye went to the other extreme. You're not koina anything, not even himself. Amalei Rava. So Rava asked Abaye, Bishlama nechasim lo likni. I understand why he's not koina the nechasim. Midi the have akim star is dalma, because the star has to be niskayim and it's not. El atzmoi likni. Why wouldn't you allow him to be koina himself? Midi the have a gedisha. El Amar Rava. Therefore Rava argues, and Rava says echad zeh ve'echad zeh. Whether he said nechasai knuyin lach in one big comment, or whether he said two things, atzmach and nechasai knuyin lach. Either way, atzmai kana nechasam lekana. In other words, palginon dibure. We actually split up his words, and he gets the freedom of himself, but he doesn't get to get the rest of the assets. Omer lei Rav Ada bar Masmula Rav. Haman Reb Shimon. Rava must be consistent with Reb Shimon because it's only Reb Shimon who you find the Omar Palginon dibura that says you're willing to split up what he said and say this is what he meant and this is not what he meant. Ditnan, where do you see an illustration where Reb Shimon holds Halgin Dibure? Ditnan. Hakoshev kol nechasav la'avdai. Someone wrote all of his nechasim to his evet, and Rashi says precisely the case that we're discussing. Kol nechasai nesuyin in loch. It's exactly the case that Rava and Abaye are arguing about. The loch is Yotza ben Chayrin she'afu b'chol nechasim. He's part of the nechasim. B'chol shar nechasim nami dekana. Now, I just have to make something clear. I was wrong. It's not the same case. In our case, there was no kiyum. In our case, there's a question of kiyum, right? So he's believed about himself, but he's not believed about the rest of the nechasim. Here we're talking about where he was mekayim the star. So a kosev kol nechasav, a kosev kol la'adoi means with kiyum. There's no shayla of kiyum anymore, right? So it was mekuyim. So the Allah is Yotze ben Chayrin, he goes free, and he also gets all the nechasim because it's a full bona fide good star. Dr. Rashi Yotze ben Chayrin shafu b'chal nechasim. He's also included in the nechasim of his adon. B'chol shar nechasim nami kana, again because there was kiyum here. This is not a question of him saying b'fani nechta b'fani nechta. But what if he wrote shire karka culture? What if he said, I want to keep one property for myself. I'm not giving the Eved everything. So Rashi says karka lav dafka. He didn't give over everything to the Eved. He said, I want to keep something for myself. So then, lo yotze ben chayrin. He doesn't go free. Why doesn't he go free? Because now we see that the Adon's das was not to give everything that he owned to the Eved, only to give some things. So maybe when he meant kol nichsai, maybe he didn't mean to free the Eved. I'm sorry? Well, I guess when he's kohen himself, then he's kohen the nechasim. Yeah, so right, he gets nothing. And yeah, in fact, if Shar Karka Chosher lo yotze ben chayrin, and he gets nothing. Let's see Rashi lo yotze ben chayrin. The Bishlam Reisha, the Logali Daiti, the Nachas L'Shiyura, in the ratio where he gave everything without any exception. There, in the Shire, we won't say that he kept anything for himself. Avalocha, but once he kept something for himself, the Nachas L'Shiyura. So once we know that he's not giving everything to his Eved on reserve, maybe he doesn't mean to give the Eved away either. Maybe he also wanted to keep the Eved. V'chi Omar, kol nichsei loch, he said nechasei loch, ashar nechasim kamar. Maybe he meant other nechasim, but you yourself, the Eved I want to keep. It's impossible, like Dovi says. So why would he say something that's total nonsense? If I'm giving you everything but not yourself, so I'm not really giving you anything at all. Zogt Rashi, he's just trying to manipulate his Eved. Ulechanufe leikaasi. He's just trying to toy with him and flatter him. He had no intention of freeing him. Even the loy amar lay atzmach unechasai. Rather, he just said nechasai, and he made a shiura. We assume that he doesn't want to give the Eved anything at all. So that's not the shita of Palgin Diburi. Rab Shimon Aimer, and we'll continue this tomorrow. La'olam hu ben chayrin. He would be a ben chayrin. At shiyoymar kol nechasai nesunu l'twan yavi chutz me'echad meriboy shebehen. If he says kol nechasai chutz me'echad meriboy, we'll see Rashi why that would mean that he doesn't mean to free his Eved. But other than that, you would say Palgin Diburi, and in fact, you would say some nechasim he does want to give, some nechasim he does not want to give, and therefore you see Palgin Diburi. So tomorrow we'll get a clarity in where in Reb Shimon you see Palgin Diburi, and that's why the Gemara made an argument that the Rava holds like Reb Shimon who holds Palgin Diburi. So tomorrow we're going to learn the sugya of Palgin Diburi. Okay, goodbye. Shkoyach. Have a wonderful, wonderful time in Eretz Yisrael. Keep us in daven for us over there. Yeah, daven in Eretz Yisrael.
Amen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, shkoyach.
You will have a wonderful day. It was very nice to see you. I was hoping you would check in. Very nice to see you.
First time I got a chance. Okay.
Okay. Do you want to know our schedule for Shavuos? No. On Shavuos, what we're doing is as follows. I'm going to give the regular shir and Mitzvah Shem on Friday, an hour before the earliest mincha. I believe the earliest mincha is 7, so I'm going to learn at 6. And on Shabbos, the same thing, an hour before mincha. And Shavuos night, I'm going to prepare, but we can prepare by Chavrusa. So I plan on starting at 1 and going straight through the night, and we'll prepare as far as we get. So it's not going to be geschmiert. We're going to learn together. Gemara, Rash Taisus, we'll go through the sugyas together. Yeah. So whoever wants to join can